So welcome to this podcast today, a Realliance podcast. My name's James, and Realliance is a network of regenerative practitioners around the world, and we ask the question, how can we create resilience and abundance even in times of crisis? Now, I'm joined today with two fantastic women from the regenerative movements who are very proud to be speaking with today. So thank you both so much for joining us. We're here today with Precious Phiri, who is a well-regarded practitioner and trainer of holistic management. She is the Africa coordinator of Regeneration International and a judge on the Lush Spring Prize panel. Hi, Precious.
Hi everyone. Thanks, James, for having us here.
Thanks so much. And we're here with Rosemary Morrow, who is a renowned permaculture teacher and author of the book, The Earth User's Guide to Permaculture. Hi, Ro. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for your kind words, James. It's lovely to be here and to be here with Precious as well. That's a bit special.
Thank you so much for joining us. So first of all, I'd love to ask a question. Where are you calling from? And what is something special about the place that you're calling in from? Precious, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure, I can. I am calling in from Zimbabwe. So I live in the Victoria Falls region, which is in the great lands of Hwange National Park. So I think what's special about our bioregion, of course, it is life and there's lots of diversity, but our people actually have surnames that link to wildlife. So my birth second name is Dube, which is a zebra. And so when anyone wants to get anything at all from me, if they sing or say my surnames in praises, they'll literally get anything, because when someone wants something from you, so they'll sing all your praises. So I'll give my praises in English. It's Dube, which means zebra, a beautiful, wild, hornless animal of the wildernesses, the one who butts with milk. So that's just a few of them, but yeah.
Now we know how to get on your good side, Precious. The beautiful zebra. Oh, thank you so much for sharing. Ro, tell us about where you're calling from. What's unique about your region?
Well, there's a remarkable similarity, James, because like Precious, I'm in the middle of 1 million hectares of national park. And it was probably the second national park created in the whole world to preserve. And it's deep, it's ancient land. It was never sort of really been volcanoes or voids. So it's just wearing out. Our mountains are not peaked. Our mountains are flat because the tops have worn away over thousands of years. And we have the most wonderful wildlife, which is things like marsupials, animals which lay eggs and then hatch live young and then feed them milk. You know, we have a unique and wonderful vegetation flora, which is a result of isolation, really. But not such a very different latitude from Precious. I think she's probably slightly more Mediterranean-ish, but you know, not that far. So I'm up 1,000 meters high, more than 100 kilometers from Sydney, series of chains of villages that run through this national park, which burnt to a cinder last year and which people are still getting over and is still difficult to look at. And, you know, some people are saying, let's keep burning it so it won't be a danger. But you can burn a country back to a desert. So there's nothing left. So what is that balance? And the knowledge was held by the Gundungurra and Darug people who lived here. And this was, highland was more a meeting place than it actually was lived in. And also it was a road from the ocean to the west. and a well-known path for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, by Indigenous people. And I'd just like here for a moment for the listeners to say, Watamai, Ngalawa, Mitiga, which is the language people are trying to get back after it's forbidden to them, and encourage people. It means, hello, come in and sit down. So it's a welcome to place. And I presume it works for a podcast, though it wasn't foreseen there would be podcasts at that time. So now we're in, like, well, you know, Precious has got the build up. We've got clouds building up here, but we're autumn. We're spring. Yeah.
Beautiful. So the rains are coming.
Masses of exquisite wildflowers everywhere.
Such rich history and wisdom and beauty in your places. So thank you so much for sharing. And I invite those listening as well to consider what is unique and beautiful about the place where you're listening from. What is special about your bioregion? And I love this invitation, Ro. Come in. What was it again?
Please come in. Welcome. Come in and sit down. Because the tradition was you wouldn't enter a circle unless you were invited. So wherever people were meeting, you would stand on the outside till someone noticed you and they would call you in. So it's a calling in, but at the same time, it's acknowledgement of welcome onto the land. So I'm acknowledging that as a foreigner, and I'll always be a foreigner, that I am lucky to be living on Gundagara and Darug land. It's acknowledgement, never ceded. Sovereignty is continuous whether the government recognises it or not.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'd love to ask you both of you, a bit about the movements that you are connected with. And I know, Precious, you are connected with the holistic management movement, Ro, of course, the permaculture movement. But before I ask you a little bit about how you came to those movements, I'd love to ask you, for our listeners, some definitions. So Ro, how would you, for those listening, how would you define permaculture?
It's always very difficult because it's vast. Permaculture is everything from ethical money to architecture, to keeping a chicken in your backyard or a rabbit on your balcony, or how you move your animals around your land if you've got 1 million acres. I mean, it's vast. Fundamentally, it's using design tools to analyse and repair damaged landscapes. So it's a restoration tool for society and land so that people and all animals can live better. I think that's all I can say now, because it really defies a really good definition that people would understand. But imagine you had a toolbox and you could look at a piece of land and understand pretty quickly what was degrading and what was repairing, where you needed to intervene and how to intervene. Then you'd have permaculture and society as well.
Wow. So you're saying it's almost like a way of interacting with the world, like a lens to help us design and look at the world.
Yeah, you look at a landscape and you can say, why are they cutting down the trees on the top of the hill which are holding the water and soil? So you've done an analysis. That slope is too steep for what they want to do. They don't have the water resources for this. First of all, you go through this analysis of, and that becomes automatic. You look out a window and you've done it. And then you have the skills and the knowledge and the principles to restore. Restoration skills based on observation of what you're seeing, not based on some abstraction. It has to be real.
And it's interesting as well that you say culture and human life as well too, because often I think people look at permaculture as a way entirely for land or for gardening or in the agriculture sector, but this extra element and this extra layer of human life and culture is really interesting too.
So permaculture, strong critic of capitalism and multinational countries, much the same way as we're critiques of bringing that one single purpose of grow beef cattle in the Amazon.
Mm.
When you transplant different types of cultures, you often do damage. So, you know, the people who arrived here to invade this land and take it, they were going to build another England of ryegrass and sheep and dairy cattle. And I live in a country more like Zimbabwe, you know, totally inappropriate. So, you know, capitalism is inappropriate. Whether you're political or not, it's the wrong instrument for prosperity. It's that sort of thing. You take a principle and then you can make it work. Mm.
And Precious, how about for you in this sense of, like Rose saying, it has to be unique to the land, it has to emerge from place and be aligned with the place. I sense that holistic management has a lot of these principles as well. How would you define holistic management?
Yeah, I mean, exactly right, James. So I think, like we've always discussed before, holistic management is not in itself an end to anything, but it is a framework of decision making to help each place in its uniqueness to manage complexities that go with economic, biological, and social and cultural settings of that place. So holistic management, in a way, enables a place to thrive in its uniqueness. And I think much as Ro has actually defined, it's also how I understand regeneration in the broader terms, that it's really beyond just agriculture, but it brings to light the interconnectedness of all life and all living systems of each environment that is under management. So it's more of a framework to help us make management decisions.
How did you come to the regenerative movement, Precious?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, is it a calling or it's just naturally how I grew up and where I grew up? I was raised by my grandmother. We started farming and cropping at a very tender age. And from there, because crops always failed, we always struggled with deep poverty. My mind was set on finding solutions. And when your mind is set up like that, everywhere you go, you always meet and have paths that lead you to a place where you've always sought answers for. So that's how I came into holistic management and then the broader world of regeneration.
Interesting to hear about the connections, because you use the word regeneration almost like an umbrella, like a bubble. Is that how you see it? Regeneration is a collection of movements?
Regeneration is a collection of movements, I would say. And I think a collection of movements that make decisions that won't put the earth that we live in trouble. And I mean, some people view it differently, but to me, that's what has been making so much sense. Yeah.
And Ro, how about your understanding of permaculture? Because, of course, permaculture emerged with that name from the land that you are living on. So you must have been there since, when the name started to emerge.
Yes, that's right, James. I was. And I was reasonably early to come to permaculture. You know, the 85, 86 is quite a long time ago now. It's 40 years or more. It's a long time. Get old doing permaculture. And having been an agricultural scientist in a time of, still the flow over from World War II, where science was strongly reductionist. Today they call it silos, but then it was just called reductionist. You would go into one single topic, the increment depth. So you would study some soil in the laboratory without reference to the climate or the microclimate or the plant or the animal or whatever was happening. So then when I found permaculture, the main thing was I was in Lesotho, which is not that far from Zimbabwe, for about 4 years, and I loved it. And I realized that the people didn't have enough to eat. What I was seeing was a degraded country, but I didn't know that then. It was degraded because of the cattle and the loss of vegetation. And I came back thinking agriculture science can't do anything for this place. People are hungry on a small scale farms, and the boys have gone off to South Africa to dig coal and gold and jewels out of the ground and things. So what have we got? So I did a horticulture course, I did an environmental course, and none of it worked, because how do you preserve what's natural? Not preserve in the sense of put it in a bottle, but allow it to adapt over time. And how do you feed people, and how do you keep what maintains soil, water and climate? So what's that balance that keeps the natural and the cultivated in some sort of equilibrium? That was my question. When I did my permaculture course, I thought, well, I'm not going to teach it this way, but this is where I would like to be. So that was pretty much it. You know, it was Lesotho, Southern Africa, that kicked me off up there in the Maluti Mountains.
How was that regarded when you, because I imagine this was quite a revolutionary or different way of approaching permaculture teaching. What did other people think?
Oh, well, of course, Bill and early teachers sat in a chair and talked for 72 hours non-stop, sometimes the beer, sometimes the cigarette, sometimes with a big steak in front of them. And I thought, I don't want to teach unless people learn. So how do people learn? So I put a lot of work in the next year or two trying to develop a process under which people could learn. And it isn't just making sure you listen to them, it's making sure they get time to be heard and to listen, and the confidence and trust to ask, query and debate. So in the first couple of days, you've got to have someone who says, I don't agree. I don't agree with what you're saying. And at that stage, you've got them, because everyone else feels free to question what you're doing. So I took away the whiteboard and put it on the ground. I took away the chair and sat in a circle, so no one could tell really who the teacher was from a point of view of height and power. Whoever holds the chalk has the power. You know, I kept saying it and then I'd drop the chalk and sit down. But the main thing was to fill gaps in knowledge, to enable people to learn and find out what was missing rather than fill an empty cup. You know, I was not interested in filling jugs. And yet the whole permaculture teaching was very much about filling people with this knowledge. So I think I was pretty radical when I started. I went to a program called Alternatives to Violence, which is based on experience. So we get people to talk about their experience of soils in a way that was directed. What are the main parts of soils? How do they work together? Draw a map, make your own ecosystem. Microorganisms, organic matter, waters, you know, that's up to you. Put it together. People always can. They've been growing plants, walking on soil, drinking water. Most of the topics is just a little bit of fill, not too much. And most people try to teach people many things they know.
So drawing on existing knowledge as well too. And it sounds like a very participatory approach, quite different from the traditional classroom, like you say.
Look, one day the teacher goes away and you have to leave a group who's independent and strong. So you have to make sure everyone talks to everyone else in groups and exercises, whether they're going out to look at microclimates and they're taking, but you mix them up all the time so they know each other's strengths and ability. Adults bring so much and often they're treated like children. So, or people who may be not literate are treated as if they're unintelligent. Every now and again you find someone who's illiterate, who's got a mind like a nuclear physicist, and you just feel so, oh gosh, you know, what am I doing trying to teach this person? The questions they're asking are beyond me. You know, it's just a matter of trust, respect for your listener. It has to be these things.
Yeah, no, I love what Roy is saying.
I think over and above the definitions of what these concepts mean, for me, I found that actually how you share information and experiences is different on many levels. And I think one of the things, like she's saying, especially with holistic management, you can use the framework to manage an organization. You can use the framework to make management decisions for your family, for you, and then your farm. Thankfully, the founder of holistic management developed this concept and framework while he was working in his early years in the African rangelands with wildlife, and learning and questioning how are deserts advancing so much, and of course it led to then tools that we use in holistic management of grazing, which is management of livestock, and also animal impact to then heal these landscapes. So when we then take this information and you're working with communities that are faced with different kind of challenges, most of them are in the front lines of the weather changes that are stimulated by climate change. But more than that, these people are not empty cups, like Ro says. So you're not coming in to fill them with information. So that immediately takes away the word expert. I don't think there's an expert in regeneration, in holistic management, or permaculture. We are just continuous students of the landscapes that we manage. Mm-hmm. And so with communities, we do together what we call ecological literacy, which is reading our landscape to say, as a broad landscape, what is it communicating to us? How are the ecosystem processes functioning in this landscape? What happens to water when it rains? What happens to the sun when it hits the earth? Taking and gleaning from what Alan Savory has said before, that I think the wealth of nations and civilizations will be held together for a longer time by using the solar energy that is coming to plants, and through photosynthesis, producing then foods that will create generational wealth. So we depend on lands that are covered, that are thriving, for us to then access wealth. That's exactly what Ro was saying. And so as communities, you continuously do what we call ecological literacy, reading the land, ecosystem processes, how are they functioning? And then that's what helps your decision on what tools can we then borrow from the toolbox of holistic management or regeneration or permaculture or agroecology. Some spaces need composting, other spaces are huge. You're talking thousands of hectares of land. How do you compost that? So there's no one size fits all in a sense, but I think as a facilitator of the knowledge, you are also a student at the same time, because the people that are native to that land, most of the times do have the answers as you keep unpacking the journey together.
I imagine that coming to, we're all doing finger wiggles, which means we agree completely with what Precious is saying. How do you come to that in a sense that I imagine, as you're both saying, you want to break down these traditional hierarchies of teacher and student, and it's about learning from one another. But I imagine that some of these attitudes are quite internalized, of course, sometimes in teachers or trainers, but also in people who are learning. Are there processes that you have to go through to help people open up to a space like this?
Definitely. So, James, that's very interesting that you've said that. Because what I've faced in most cases when you come to communities, it's a legacy over time that we've all learned that we've come here to learn. There's this expert who has come. She has 15 years experience in the field, and you're given this high chair. So I think the first thing is to really take down the high chair and to sit in a circle with them, if that is appropriate in the place. There are some places that are traditionally very segmented. So you sit in that segmentation as well, fit in where you belong in your own understanding in that moment. So first of all, I think taking down the high chair, and then in my case, we use what we call experiential learning. So we bring in lots of tools, visuals, hands-on stuff where we feel, experience, and then go through processes of what sort of conclusions are we making out of this. So we can make our generalized statements on the overall lessons that we all got together, and then eventually say, how do we apply this? So at first, so there's lots of questioning and crisscross dialoguing, and it may be very hard to crack that. But I think different tools and different games, when you apply them according to relevance in that space. And sometimes in my case, you also tap into the cultural knowledge and sayings, idioms, for example. When you're talking about land degradation, for example, the elders had a way of making people not just rummage earth all around. So, for example, if you were pounding the soil or if you used a sledge across the land, they would say something like, oh, your mom will break her back if you do that. So no one wants to break their mom's back. So then you don't just break the land unnecessarily. So even how we evolved, especially in Africa, people would forage different kinds of foods. And then there are some that, would run scarce if you just, because sometimes it tastes very nice. And so there's a tendency to then want to amass to yourself that. So they'll put in sacred sayings around a certain food. For example, foods in the mountains and things are shared with baboons and other apes and other living beings. So for example, when you go up the mountain and you see a fruit, if you eat it, you cannot say, oh, this is bitter, this is this, because the gods of the mountain will be angry with you. But then it's just showing you the next time you won't just harvest a lot, you'll just take just enough and almost not eat it so that baboons and them can eat. So it's those things. So you can create dialogue around that, and then it opens lots of interest. It's just an example. Yeah.
Look, I'm a white-haired, blue-eyed person with a skin that gets sun cancer. And there's a real danger in that. And I think I've fallen into the holes of doing it. When I'm teaching at home, when I'm away, I have to be really careful. And someone said to me, how can you go to a place where you don't speak the language and don't know it, and you're a pale face? Well, first of all, you refuse privilege. I'm lucky I'm small, so I'm not tall and overbearing. It does help. I can move with the group. But when it comes to perhaps making gardens and things, they'll say to me, what shall we grow? And I say, well, just get into groups. And I don't put people into groups. They form their own because they're adults and they can do this. And then I'll say, what are the 10 foods that are easier to grow? Now double up those groups and decide again. So all I'm doing is saying, come up with the 10 hardiest foods in this harsh, dry country. Suppose we're in Afghanistan or Iraq or somewhere. So I'm not going to make this decision. You know what will grow. You know what happened in the last drought. Then I'll say, what are the seeds? What's the growing time to harvest? Everyone work on all these crops and make sure you know what you need to know to grow them well. What's the nutrient, the water, the protection, the harvest, the seed saving. Often I can add something, like perhaps they've got bags of sorghum and I'll say, well, just do the viability test. Fill this with water, drop the seed in. If it floats, it's dead. Take it back to the seed merchant and say, you've tricked me. So there are bits of things you can put in for people. And they will say, yes, well, look, we tested it and 2/3 of the bag was really rotten seed. And say, okay, take it back. They're not allowed to do that. It doesn't matter where you are, or else you will starve or plant empty or dead seed. So really, when it comes to something like tree products, I'll say list all the trees and all the products, and then decide what they are and where they grow. So it's a little bit directing the knowledge to a good result, but it's trying to stay away from saying, you've got to grow this, you've got to grow a lettuce, you need to grow a cow. It's trying to just organise the knowledge so it's useful to them, and in conversations together, people get out of it what they want, and find out who the experts are in their group too. They identify someone and they're having a break and they're tell me this and why that, and because they're all there in your class.
And Ro, you also co-founded an organization or a network called Permaculture for Refugees. These tools, these practices that you're describing, why are they especially important or important for people who may be displaced or people living as refugees?
It feels so self-evident that where you've got 1 million Rohingya living in Bangladesh in horrific circumstances, that they're dependent on World Food, WFP, World Food Programme food handouts, UNHCR. Zimbabwe's got one of the biggest camps in the world. And, they've had huge numbers. People are often in a refugee camp for up to 20 years, resettlement longer. Their lives are unstable, they're vulnerable, they're living with uncertainty, they don't know if they'll get documents or not. What can you do to give people useful skills that if they move on, it's in their head and life and they can use what they've used? How can you transform a camp from being a dusty, filthy place to being something that people could live in if they have to be there for years? So it's equity, it's fairness, it's giving people access to knowledge they'd be able to get if they were home probably in a stable society. Why should they be disadvantaged? Because war, environment. You can really think of all the reasons. The interesting thing is that people want it. By the time we're halfway through a class, they're coming in the door saying, we want a course and we want a course and we want to do this. Because of the utility, sometimes it's to learn a bit of English, sometimes all the reasons that come. But we also take the dogs, the chickens, the children, they walk through and everyone can come. We always say we must have 50% women. And it's successful where we include the local NGO to learn with refugees, local residents and farmers to learn with refugees. So we're NGO and refugees and local inhabitants, with nearly 2/3 of refugees, because otherwise they won't speak. They feel maybe they shouldn't speak. And then when we go, they continue it. And that's the data I'm looking at now. What happened afterwards? And through COVID, through fires, through troubles, it's been a mixture of the NGO and the local residents and the refugees, what they set up then when food supplies stopped, isolation set in, fires burnt down 2 camps, chickens died in another one. They have really had a horrific life, and it's been minimal what they could do, but they could do something. What we realised, we must have seed producers in camps, growing seed for themselves because the seed supply ran out. So it's very powerful because people like doing it. They often have some tradition. It gives in. Otherwise, you spend all night wanting to ring home from Syria to see if your family's alive, to see if your brother survived, to see whether. Otherwise, you've got something else to talk about. And it's neutral ground to grow beans. It's really neutral. You don't have to get into politics or what they'll do or anything. So it operates on many levels. It's a meta learning for people. And it's very respectful because of what people know and can do and want to do. My experience as refugees, they're, given a chance to participate and take control, they'll manage the whole thing beautifully. And I want them to manage the thing by the end, because I can't manage. And they'd be worse off. But also to own it and use it practically. But what we want to do is to get it into all the big refugee agencies, World Vision and Red Cross, Red Crescent and UNHCR. And we're only going to do that by getting the final what people did afterwards. We know how to teach. It's exactly what Precious said. We bring out, here's a water tank, and here's a something, and what else? Oh, I've got the thing here, you could use this for whatever. And we use drawings. We don't use much language in case people are illiterate. We put keywords in people's languages on the board if it's not translated, and it often isn't, as in Chin and, you know, some of the Asian Myanmar languages. So we're just making it as approachable as we can, not dumbed down. Teach them the most difficult concepts, but just make sure it's done in a way that's accessible. Never dumb it down and say they can grow a bean, corn and something, because they'll never understand. Can't do that.
That's such a beautiful sharing. What I'm gleaning and harvesting from that is almost to say whether it's a refugee camp or an originally native community in that space, I feel like this work is meant to build back the dignity of the human race and improve the relationship with the surrounding living systems around them. I think most of the times, our rural people here at home, we define poverty as an inability to actually feed your family from your own land. You know, that's the biggest marker of that's a very poor family. And so it's undignified to depend on food from elsewhere, especially if you don't know where it was grown and it came by sheep. And so I think at the core of this work, it's creating connectedness, but also building back the confidence that we also carry solutions. So it's such a massive work. I think I always say, Roy, like you said, that it's easy to check if the seeds are okay. And I'm kind of intrigued because we use the same way to check if these seeds will germinate or not. You float them in the water. Even if you're cooking your cowpeas from the field, you float them in the water. You know the ones with substance will stay below. And the ones that are not very helpful in the moment, you give them back to nature. You know, so the technical aspects of this work, honestly, planning grazing, creating fertility in the crop fields, whether you're using bokashi, biofertilizers, fermented, all those technical aspects, I think they can take 30 minutes because communities are also scientists, you know, they can literally jump on and start doing the work. Farmers are scientists, they are great researchers, but organizing and creating space for dialogue is the bigger part of this work. And recreating and redefining environments of learning, I think it's the bigger part of this work.
So the kind of wider social spectrum is maybe what needs to shift.
Yeah, in most cases, yes, because also I'm sure all of us know the issues of industrial agriculture, all the lessons that people have learned about what is fertility of soil and all the synthetics that come into play when you're building soil fertility and bumper harvest. And also how we make decisions to what help can we give to our soil so that it can feed us. It's been so reductionist because we focus on the harvest as an ultimate goal. But what if we treated it as an outcome of our generous actions to the soil? For example, it will challenge even the inputs and instruments that we use to get that harvest. At what cost are we going to have a bumper harvest? So now you're relating to what you've put in the soil. What does it do to the living organisms, other communities underground the soil? And how will this affect your soil health in the long run and in the long term? And even when you're talking about the food that they eat, you build above and beyond the knowledge of just nutrition in the food, but health in itself as an essence. Because nutrition is being stricken down to just zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, and that's not food. But food is health, and health starting from the ground where this food came from. So it's carrying more than the nutritious minerals that you know. but also the things that you fed into the soil. They keep the soil healthy and make your body healthy. So it's really lots of strings of unlearning together with the communities. It's very difficult, but it's not absolutely impossible.
I'd love to touch on, Precious, you mentioned these strings of unlearning, because it really sounds like a whole different way of interacting with the soil, with communities, a whole different way of seeing the world. And Ro, I'd love to ask you about what do you think needs to change in order to get to this more ecologically minded or connection-minded way of seeing?
When I was writing something about marine permaculture, which sounds strange, the thing I came up with was people are starting to say the ocean will eat the shores, the ocean will destroy, the ocean will get us, the floods will come in, the ocean. That says the ocean is malevolent. And what I got from the Hawaiians is that the ocean starts at the first drop of water at the top of the hill, and everything that happens to it all the way down is going to affect the ocean. But what we do to the ocean is not malevolent, but it responds. So when you load it with carbon dioxide or put junk out from plastic and boats and things, there is a responsiveness because its equilibrium is built up. And the word I'm thinking about, and was thinking about when speaking then, is reciprocity. That as the earth is merciful and bountiful and kind unless we've deprived it of that. So it can't give back unless we give too. And most of the systems we see today are heavily degraded. So that concept of being able to look at something somewhat degraded and give to it. So we need to be more generous in relation to a world that has kept climate imbalance and food supplies going for most of, well, since the first plants probably arrived and had coloured flowers and had insects. You know, that has been a growing, developing process. To get people engaged, there's what you can do that makes sense. Wow, I'd love to plant a forest and in 1,000 years it's still there. How's that? There's that look. Or I'd love to grow wonderful food and supply it to my neighbours in the street. So you can, someone's intuitive thing arises and I want to grow breeds of traditional animals. I want to, it doesn't matter. But if you can get someone saying, I want to, then you've got them started. The other thing is think we all need a sense of wonder. I sat the other day outside here, a little bit of sun, you know, where it's coming back, and I saw a lizard. I saw a beetle that I swear was sunbaking. It came out of the things and it flipped over and lay there with its legs waving with the sun on its stomach. I saw the ants, and then I saw this bird just come and eat a blowfly. It just went, whoa, whoa, whoa. And the joy and the wonder of the natural world and the joy and the wonder of living things, because there's a wonder in rock and rock formation and things that are thousands of years old. There's also, the other day I just stopped for a minute and I thought, that sun, it's doing everything for all of us. And we're 93 million miles away in the right place at the right time. On this degree, it's all one big miracle I'm living in. I live in a huge miracle with all its problems, but really, so to get people, I'm not going to say observing because that's a little distant, but full of wonder, but you can't make that the goal. It's something to do with people's responses to, I'd love to do a bit more citizen science. I want to do art around this, really letting people find their space. But I'm very worried by so many people living in flats and houses and diminished landscapes, because where's that place where you go, oh, that was beautiful. Did you see the way that cloud just moved so fast across there against the other clouds. That was, what's the wind doing? Where's that smell come from? It's this responsiveness to the wonder. And really, that's my sense of miracle. It is a miracle. The whole interconnected synchronicity. So you carry a great grief about climate change and degradation, enormous grief. But I don't think it can ever stop you because you've given up then. Yeah. But, it's not really, you couldn't give a lecture and go and lecture people and tell them the facts and say, you're doing it all wrongly. You want them to cringe when someone's cutting down a tree. Take some branches, yes, but don't cut the tree. Cringe if they plough a field that's full of wonderful stuff. Cringe if they're putting a concrete slab on the ground because that'll cool the water systems. That little whimper, I wish they'd leave that alone. I wish they'd do this better. Because that translates into signing a petition, going on a march, holding up, get rid of fossil fuels. It works across a number of things, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Hopefully not even just a little whimper, like you say, getting in on marches but I love this, that it emerges from a sense of wonderment at all these interconnected, beautiful living systems.
And from my age, support the young. They've got it. They know where it's about. School, strike for climate change. I'm right up there. You kids have got it. You know where it is. Don't get disillusioned and cynical. Support people doing good things everywhere. Yeah.
I see you wearing an XR badge.
Yes, of course. Aren't they wonderful? Their methods of working and the things they do. Oh, I'll go along there. They need some grey hair.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, wonderful, Ro.
Precious, how do you see this emerging? What is it that you see needs to emerge for these changes to take root?
Yeah, so I think, Ro said this so beautifully. I was almost tempted to say, what she said is exactly as I'm feeling as well in my region here. But maybe just to add on to say there's lots of organizations that are working in this space. My desire is to see more collaborations, more sharings and learnings within the organizations and between organizations, and then also creating strong partnerships with farmers. I think the idea of farmers as the leaders in science and research in the regenerative permaculture, holistic management, I think should emerge stronger, because the more farmers share the stories, I think it bears and carries so much power and weight for other farmers to learn from them, because they are from the same settings. So it's unlike when an external person comes to share knowledge. But imagine a creation of platforms where farmers could showcase. Thankfully, I think there's lots of movements like that across the continent of Africa, where people showcase seeds. You're creating good seed and good food sovereignty, because you can say food security, but what is that food? But then sovereignty speaks of you are in charge of both the production and the continuity of that production, including how you save seeds, how you store them. So you have a whole trace of the history of this food that you're now carrying. So I feel like we need lots of those platforms, and really to create such a joy for farmers. And to add it on, creating those strong linkages of markets. Because when the pandemic happened, actually, the market routes were really disrupted. And as you know, most of our African countries, we had massive lockdowns. I was talking to my friend the other day, we're like, hey, man, this is the longest 10 years we've heard in our lives. And, it feels like it's been 10 years since we've been locked up, and there isn't much ease of movement. So I think both populations in the city and the rural communities, all of us need to embrace the idea of growing your own food, the idea of actually regenerating the spaces around you, because this pandemic has shown us that when one part of our lives sink, we actually sink as team humanity. So the farmers will be stuck with product, and people in the city are stuck without product, and there is no connectivity between the two. And so there's no well-being for one without the well-being for the other. And then another thing is helping the language and dialogue of our communities, because I think we've gone through so much. I mean, talking not only of the pandemic, but just cycles of really hardships, tough landscapes, degradation, desertification, failed cropping all the time. And that brings in negativity in general. So people don't really feel inspired or motivated to actually do something. And so this message and the work that I think most of us are doing out there on bringing solutions that work with each area is a message of hope, and also changing the language from negativity to actual possible solutions. People, some of them may be thinking, you know what, I have to sort out my family, I have to sort out myself. But then you're bringing someone from me to a we excel as well. Say we're a collective, we can do these solutions together. And from scarcity to abundance mentality. And in this case, abundance is not only abundant landscapes or beautiful landscapes, or abundance in ownership of wealth, whatever that is, as far as wealth is concerned. I'm not just talking about money. But this abundance is that of a space of thinking that says whatever we have is enough for everyone. And it really counteracts abundance is how it is defined in the moment. To say abundance is me having a lot to myself. So when we're talking with communities, I usually unpack abundance to say abundance and generosity. So we abound by sharing, we increase by sharing, and we increase by always reciprocating even to the landscapes that we manage. So I think it's a lot of concepts and processes that surround this work. But I think us as workers of this work, we need to simplify, clarify what we mean, and continuously define. You will not believe how important it is to define things. Even just agriculture. What do you mean by agriculture? What do you mean by regeneration? You know, because things get hijacked and get lost in translation. And so sometimes continuously defining what we mean as the people working on the field, it really helps.
I love what you say about the fair distribution of resources built into what we mean by abundance. And I see that really married in permaculture's core ethic of fair share as well. So, so wonderful to see this resonance.
Yeah, a little side story, James, before you progress. When you say fair share, so I have a good friend, Julius Pitti. I'm sure most people know him.
Oh, no, Julius.
So yes. So I was working with some of his communities. By the way, so our land is Zimbabwe is very big. So Julius is like about 12 hours away from where I am. So I just packed my little family in a car, went to train Julius's communities. So we were talking, creating a vision of values with one of these community groups. So they've worked a lot on permaculture. And one of the community members say, you know, one of our values is we share surplus. So I was like, oh, okay, that's great. So we're sharing surplus, yeah. And it was nice because I think they've been building a lot of abundance thinking at that scale. So it's just a little story. So one community member quickly arose and said, no, we don't necessarily share surplus, we share. So what if I don't have, what if I don't have a surplus? So does it mean that things around me must suffer because I don't have things to spare? But you don't share from what you can't use or from what you're not needing, but we share from a space of saying, you're my neighbor. If you have a need, we can always exchange. So it was really amazing.
I love that. That's a really powerful framing of, you know, not just sharing what you don't need, what you might just throw out anyway, sharing despite what you have, sharing everything.
Coming from Western European, I find that they have great deal more difficulty in working with sharing. Whether I'm in the Middle East or Asia or somewhere else, people share and then get here, and mine and I are much stronger. And if I had a mission, it would be a mission to the West to share everything from governments to literature to everything. It would have to be reciprocal because we've got so much to learn. But the accumulation of stuff as a way of trying to feel safe is a huge problem to the West. And once you decide to share, everything changes. So you can go on to the virtuous economy, or you can say, look, I'm not charging for anything anymore, I've got enough. And I did that once with very rich people, and they were shocked because no one gives them anything. They give, they're the rich. I said, no, I don't want to be paid. But the whole thing was, when you get to enough, then everything else, you know, it just falls in. But I would love to see that transformation of the Europeanized, colonizing still world to share properly and open-heartedly and fairly. You know, we're seeing it now with COVID and vaccines. And if I have a mission, it would be two things. The role of humans is regenerative and restorative, because there's so much degradation. So, you know, I'd like to be carrying T-shirts saying restore the earth, restore, build, regenerate. And the other thing would be share more, share.
Ro, I could listen to you forever. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. I guess to everyone listening, also thank you for the gift of your ears, while we also poured out from the small experiences that we have, and it is by no means taken for granted. I think my heart weight is placed is to really give lots of thanks to those that continuously believe in the dream of a better world. Those like Ro, who continue now, she's even writing another book, who continue to challenge the ongoing systems around us, who continue to say, well, there could be another way. And those who continue to simplify the body of knowledge that's been put out so that everyone can have access to this information and begin wherever they are. And I think these people that are receiving this information is everyone from a college student, a young person in a rural village or in the city. Everyone who is eating is involved in the action of agriculture. And I think this information must spread far and wide. And it is time to really challenge the trajectory of where our world is going. And I have a friend of mine that we always talk about, you know, I think the attitude that we should carry now is that of excitement of all the possibilities. We're not oblivious of the toughness of what it takes, but that can be draining. So what you do, you acknowledge that it is tough as a way of settling with it, because it can get stressful. But to activate the hormones of joy, I think we have to be excited of all the possibilities that are there, celebrating small steps, celebrating a harvest of a pumpkin where you never grew anything before, and it will inspire you to share with the next person and let this spread a different positivity altogether. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you both so much. And thank you, Precious, for invoking the power of joy as well, too. I think that's so, so powerful to bring joy and pleasure into the work that we do. Like you say, despite it sometimes being quite daunting, what we are facing, just bringing the joy in too. I'd just love to say a huge thank you to Rosemary Morrow and Precious Phiri for spending time with us, these two fantastic people from regenerative movements. Ro, where can people find out more about your work?
There's the Permaculture For Refugees.org, work Blue Mountains Permaculture Institute, where accept people who may not be literate but have done good work to give them a diploma of merit. So we're utterly outside the formal system. You do not have to go through a summit. It's a recognition. So the Blue Mountains Permaculture Institute and Permaculture for Refugees.
James, I think I can be found at Igugu Trust, IGUGU Trust.com. So it's a small website that we created to keep sharing the work that we're doing here, and also Regeneration International. It's a bigger platform, and there's a lot more on regeneration and resources and all the different partners that we're doing, that we're working with internationally.
So thank you both so much. This has been
Thank
a pleasure.
you. Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.